The college football world thought this chapter was already closed. One quarterback had gone #1 overall, stepped into the NFL spotlight, and moved on. The other stayed behind, betting on himself for one more year. But in a moment nobody saw coming, Caleb Williams just pulled that story back into the spotlight, and what he revealed instantly reignited one of the most talked about quarterback connections in recent memory. What was supposed to be a routine press conference turned into something much bigger. Caleb Williams wasn't there to stir headlines. He wasn't there to revisit college glory or relive past rivalries. He was there to talk about his rookie season, the pressure, the hits, and the reality of life as an NFL quarterback. But then, a simple question sent everything in a completely different direction. One mention of Colorado, one reminder of that chaotic night in Boulder, and suddenly, the #1 pick was opening up about a quarterback many assumed he'd already left behind. And that's when the tone changed. Without hesitation, without forced politeness, and without the usual canned response fans expect from star athletes, Caleb said something that immediately made people stop scrolling. He didn't downplay the matchup. He didn't brush it off as old news. He didn't act like he was on a different level. Instead, he made it clear. Shedeur Sanders is a hell of a player. Simple, direct, and loaded with meaning. That single comment carried way more weight than it sounded like at first. This wasn't some generic compliment tossed out to avoid controversy. This was the face of a franchise, the former Heisman winner, the guy who was supposed to change everything in Chicago, openly giving credit to a quarterback who chose not to enter the draft with him, a quarterback who stayed in college, a quarterback who many fans are already lining up to compare against him. And that's exactly why this moment matters, because praise like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from experience, from pressure, from lining up across the field, hearing the noise, feeling the energy, and knowing the guy on the other sideline can actually match it. Caleb wasn't speaking as a former college star reminiscing about the past. He was speaking as someone who had seen Shedeur up close, in the biggest spotlight, when everything was on the line. The timing made it even more intriguing. Caleb is in the middle of one of the toughest stretches of his young career. Every throw is dissected, every mistake is amplified, and instead of deflecting attention or protecting his own image, he chose honesty, he chose respect, and that caught people off guard. Because in a league built on comparisons, ego, and constant debate, moments like that are rare. And once those words left his mouth, the conversation changed. Fans started asking new questions, analysts started connecting dots, and suddenly a game from 2023 wasn't just a memory anymore. It was the foundation of a storyline that's still unfolding. Because to understand why Caleb said what he said and why it landed the way it did, you have to go back to where this connection really began. One game, one atmosphere, and one night that tied both quarterbacks together in ways people are only just starting to realize. Caleb Williams' transition to the NFL has been anything but smooth, and that reality has hit hard. The jump from dominating college defenses to surviving Sundays in the league has exposed just how unforgiving this level really is. At USC, Caleb was used to creating magic, extending plays, escaping pressure, and turning broken moments into highlights. In the NFL, those same instincts are being tested every single snap by defenders who are faster, stronger, and far less forgiving. The early expectations were sky high. A #1 overall pick doesn't get patience, he gets pressure. From the moment Caleb stepped into Chicago, the narrative was already written for him. He was supposed to be the instant fix, the savior, the quarterback who would erase years of frustration and finally stabilize a struggling franchise. Instead, he walked into a situation where protection has been inconsistent, timing has been off, and mistakes are magnified the second they happen. Every week has felt like a lesson the hard way. Defensive fronts collapse the pocket before routes can fully develop. Elite pass rushers don't miss when they get a clean shot. And when plays break down, the windows to improvise are razor thin. This isn't the Pac-12 anymore, where raw talent alone could tilt the field. This is a lead where one missed read or one half-second delay can turn a promising drive into a highlight for the opposing defense. What stood out, though, is how Caleb has handled it. He hasn't hidden from the criticism. He hasn't dodged responsibility. When asked about the hits, the pressure, and facing guys who can completely wreck a game plan, he didn't flinch. He acknowledged the reality, he admitted the challenge, and he made it clear that this is part of the process, not an excuse. There have been moments where the struggles are impossible to ignore. Late-game decisions scrutinized on every sports show, interceptions replayed from every angle, fans questioning whether the hype was real or if the adjustment is simply too big. But even in those moments, Caleb's mindset hasn't wavered. He's been open about believing the ball should be in his hands when the game is on the line. That confidence hasn't disappeared, it's just being tested. This is the side of the NFL most fans don't talk about when draft night celebrations are happening. The league humbles everyone eventually, especially quarterbacks who come in with superstar expectations. And Caleb is learning that lesson in real time, under the brightest possible spotlight. The scars are forming early, but those scars are often what separate quarterbacks who survive from quarterbacks who eventually thrive. And that context is critical, because when someone fighting through that kind of pressure takes a moment to stop, look back, and give genuine respect to another quarterback, it means something, especially when that quarterback hasn't even entered the league yet. And that's exactly why what Caleb said next hit differently. Then came the moment nobody expected. In the middle of questions about protection breakdowns, defensive pressure, and the grind of an NFL rookie season, Caleb Williams was suddenly asked to look backward instead of forward. Not toward his Heisman year, not toward draft night, but toward one specific college game that still lives rent-free in the minds of football fans. USC versus Colorado, Boulder, 2023. There was no pause, no media-trained setup, no attempt to reframe the question. Caleb didn't smirk or deflect. He went straight to the point. Shedeur Sanders is a hell of a player. That was it. And the simplicity of that statement is exactly why it landed so hard. Because in today's football world, praise is usually strategic. Compliments are calculated. Players are careful about who they elevate, especially when comparisons are inevitable. And make no mistake, Shedeur Sanders is one of the quarterbacks Caleb will be compared to for years. Same era, same spotlight, same conversations about arm talent, confidence, and leadership. Yet Caleb didn't hesitate to acknowledge him. What made the comment even more surprising was the context. This wasn't during college, when mutual respect is expected. This wasn't draft season, when quarterbacks hype each other up to boost narratives. This was during a difficult stretch of Caleb's own career, when most players would stay locked in on themselves and avoid giving fuel to outside debates. Instead, he chose honesty over ego. And it didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound like something pulled from a press guide. It sounded like something that had been sitting there for a while, like a thought formed in the heat of competition and carried forward through time. The kind of respect that only comes from facing someone when the lights are brightest and realizing they belong there too. Caleb could have easily reframed the game around his own dominance. He could have leaned on the final score. He could have reminded everyone why he was the Heisman winner and the #1 pick. But he didn't. He went out of his way to separate team results from individual talent, and that distinction matters, especially coming from someone who knows exactly what elite quarterback play looks like. That's why the reaction was immediate. Fans latched onto it, analysts replayed it, social media ran with it, not because the words were loud, but because they were genuine. It was one elite quarterback in the middle of being tested by the league, openly acknowledging another elite talent who hasn't even taken that leap yet. And once that door was opened, it forced everyone to revisit the moment that created that respect in the first place, because comments like that don't come from box scores or headlines. They come from shared experience, from standing on the same field, under the same pressure, in an atmosphere that felt bigger than the game itself. And to understand why Caleb said what he said, you have to go back to that night in Boulder when everything collided. That night in Boulder didn't feel like a normal college football game, and everyone knew it the moment kickoff got closer. The build-up alone was unlike anything else that season. USC versus Colorado wasn't just another matchup on the schedule, it was the center of the college football universe for an entire week. Cameras were everywhere, social media was buzzing non-stop, and the conversation wasn't just about wins and losses, but about swagger, star power, and whether the hype surrounding Colorado was actually real. Folsom Field was packed to the brim, and the energy felt more like a playoff game than a regular season showdown. Celebrities filled the sidelines, cameras scanned the crowd as much as they focused on the field. Lil Wayne was in the building, big names were everywhere you looked. This wasn't just a football audience, it was a cultural moment. Even people who rarely tuned in to college football were locked in, trying to see what Coach Prime had built and whether his team could stand toe-to-toe with the best.
Colorado had become the most polarizing program in the country, seemingly overnight. Shedeur Sanders had flipped the roster, flipped the culture, and flipped the spotlight right onto Boulder. Some fans loved it, others couldn't stand it, but nobody could ignore it. And at the center of all that attention was Shedeur Sanders, running the offense with confidence well beyond his years, unfazed by the cameras or the noise surrounding his last name. On the other sideline stood USC, a program with its own legacy and expectations. In leading them was Caleb Williams, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and the undisputed face of college football at the time. He wasn't just the best quarterback in the country, he was the measuring stick. Every big moment, every primetime game, every matchup like this was another chance to prove why he was viewed as the top prospect in the sport. The storyline was irresistible. The established superstar versus the rising star, the polished powerhouse versus the flashy rebuild, the quarterback everyone expected to be number one versus the quarterback trying to prove he belonged in the same conversation. And with the entire football world watching, there was nowhere to hide for either of them. When the teams finally took the field, the noise was deafening. The atmosphere felt tense, electric, and chaotic all at once. This was the kind of game where every snap mattered, where momentum swings could shift narratives instantly. For Shedeur, it was a chance to validate everything people were saying about Colorado's resurgence. For Caleb, it was another opportunity to remind everyone why the hype around him existed in the first place. And once the game started, it became clear that this wasn't just about one team winning or losing. It was about how both quarterbacks handled the moment, the pressure, the expectations, the weight of an entire sport watching their every move. What happened next didn't just define the outcome of the game, it shaped how these two quarterbacks would be linked long after the final whistle blew. Once the game settled into rhythm, it didn't take long for Caleb Williams to take control. From the opening drives, he looked completely at ease, as if the noise, the cameras, and the moment were fuel rather than pressure. Every snap felt calculated. Every decision looked intentional. This was the version of Caleb that had terrorized college defenses all season, and Colorado quickly realized they were dealing with something different. He didn't just move the ball, he dictated the game. When the pocket held, he carved up the defense with precise throws to every level of the field. When it collapsed, he escaped just long enough to turn broken plays into momentum-shifting gains. Colorado's defense tried pressure, they tried containment, they tried switching looks. None of it mattered. Caleb stayed one step ahead, reading coverages like he'd seen them all before. The yards piled up fast, big throws downfield, touchdowns that sucked the air out of the stadium, drives that ended not with hope, but with inevitability. Every time Colorado tried to answer, USC responded immediately, and the engine driving it all was Caleb. He wasn't forcing anything, he wasn't playing reckless, he was simply executing at a level few quarterbacks ever reach in college football. What made it even more impressive was how effortless it looked. No panic, no rush, just confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you're the best player on the field and proving it snap after snap.
NFL scouts watching that game weren't just impressed, they were
Locked in. This was the performance that confirmed everything they already believed. Arm talent, mobility, creativity, command. By the time the game started to tilt decisively in USC's favor, it was clear who was setting the tone. Caleb had turned one of the most hyped matchups of the season into a showcase, not just for the USC offense, but for himself as the top quarterback in the country. The Heisman winner was playing like it, and the gap on the scoreboard kept growing. But here's the part most people overlook. While the final score told one story, the field told another. Because even as Caleb was dominating, the respect he would later show Shedeur didn't come from sympathy or politeness. It came from what was happening on the other side of the ball. And that's where this game becomes more than just a highlight reel. Even as the scoreboard started to lean heavily in USC's favor, Shedeur Sanders never faded into the background. That's the part of the game that stuck with people who were actually watching closely. The moment never swallowed him, the pressure never rattled him, and despite everything going wrong around him, he continued to stand in the pocket and compete like the game was still up for grabs. Shedeur didn't have the luxury of a defense that could slow Caleb down. Drive after drive, he was forced right back onto the field knowing he had to answer. And instead of pressing or playing desperate, he stayed composed. He delivered throws into tight windows. He took hits and got back up. He kept his eyes downfield even when protection broke down. That kind of poise in that environment doesn't go unnoticed, especially by the quarterback on the other sideline. There were flashes throughout the game that made it obvious why Colorado's hype wasn't just smoke. Shedeur showed arm strength that could stretch the field. He showed touch on intermediate routes. He showed an understanding of coverage that looked far beyond his age. Most importantly, he showed toughness. He didn't bail on plays. He didn't start forcing reckless throws to chase the score. He trusted his reads and played within himself, even when the margin for error was gone. That's where the respect was earned. Not in the final score, not in the headlines the next day, but in the way Shedeur handled a moment that could have easily overwhelmed him. Facing the best player in college football, on the road, with the entire country watching, and still playing like he belonged on that field. Caleb saw that. Quarterbacks always do. They recognize the difference between someone riding momentum and someone who can survive chaos. And despite USC's dominance, Shedeur never looked intimidated. He didn't shrink. He didn't look like a quarterback playing above his level. He looked like someone getting a preview of what life is like at the highest stage and responding the right way. That's why Caleb's comment years later wasn't about numbers or outcomes. It was about presence, about competitiveness, about knowing in real time that the guy across from you isn't flinching. Shedeur proved that night that he wasn't just part of the spectacle. He was one of the reasons it mattered. And that shared experience is what tied them together long after the final whistle. Because while one quarterback walked away with the win, both walked away knowing they'd just faced someone who could follow them to the next level. And that's where their paths really began to diverge. From that point on, their careers started moving in opposite directions, and the contrast couldn't be more striking. Caleb Williams took the fast lane straight into the NFL, carrying the weight of a franchise on his shoulders before he ever took a regular season snap. Shedeur Sanders, meanwhile, stepped back into college football, choosing patience over pressure and development over immediacy. Caleb's path was immediate and unforgiving. One day he was the face of college football, and the next he was lining up behind a struggling offensive line, facing defenders who get paid to turn quarterbacks into cautionary tales. There was no grace period, no time to adjust quietly. Every throw was dissected, every mistake replayed, every loss tied directly to his name. That's the price of being the #1 pick, especially in a city desperate for a savior. Shedeur's decision went the other direction, and it surprised a lot of people. He could have declared for the draft, he could have cashed in early, he could have taken his chances alongside Caleb and entered the league together. Instead, he chose to stay, to run it back at Colorado, to refine his game in an environment where he had control, continuity, and a system built around him. That choice now looks calculated, not cautious. While Caleb absorbs the NFL's growing pains in real time, Shedeur gets another year to sharpen his mechanics, improve his decision-making, and build even more confidence.
He's playing freely without the weekly punishment that comes with facing elite pass rushers. He's stacking film, boosting his draft stock, and watching closely as the realities of the league unfold for the quarterbacks who went ahead of him. And there's an unspoken lesson in all of this. The NFL isn't going anywhere. The pressure isn't going anywhere. But timing matters, situation matters, and Shedeur's choice gave him the luxury of learning from someone else's experience without paying the immediate price himself. Caleb, on the other hand, is earning his education the hard way. Every hit, every mistake, every loss is shaping him into a different kind of quarterback, one forged by adversity instead of momentum. And while it's painful now, that experience has value. Value Shedeur will eventually need when his own turn comes. Two quarterbacks, same moment in Boulder, completely different paths afterward. One charging straight into the storm, the other watching, preparing, and waiting for the right moment to step in. And that contrast is exactly what makes their connection so compelling moving forward. What makes Caleb Williams' praise of Shedeur Sanders so compelling isn't just who he was talking about, it's what it reveals about him. In a league where confidence often borders on ego and where quarterbacks are constantly measured against one another, acknowledging another rising star takes a level of security that not everyone has. Caleb didn't have to say it. There was nothing to gain from it, and that's exactly why it mattered. This is a quarterback in the middle of being tested at the highest level. His rookie season hasn't been smooth, the wins haven't piled up, the criticism hasn't slowed down. Yet instead of deflecting attention or shrinking inward, Caleb showed the mindset of someone who understands the bigger picture. He knows who he is, he knows what he's capable of, and because of that, he doesn't feel threatened by recognizing talent in someone else. There's a difference between manufactured humility and genuine respect. Caleb's words didn't sound rehearsed or strategic. They sounded like something that came from competition, from memory, and from experience. He wasn't trying to win a press conference. He was speaking like a quarterback who's already been humbled by the league and understands that greatness recognizes greatness. It also speaks to how he views the game itself. Caleb has always played with edge, confidence, and swagger, but there's an underlying self-awareness that shows up in moments like this. He knows football is bigger than one matchup, one season, or one draft class. He understands that today's comparisons don't define careers. Growth does. And that perspective is rare, especially this early. By giving Shedeur his flowers now, Caleb also set the tone for what's coming. When the comparisons inevitably ramp up, when Shedeur enters the league and the debates start flying, this moment will matter. It establishes that any future conversation isn't rooted in insecurity or rivalry, but in mutual respect. That's the foundation of real competition. Most importantly, this praise shows that Caleb isn't running from adversity. He's not clinging to past accolades to protect his identity. He's confident enough to stand in the middle of struggle and still speak honestly. That kind of mindset is what allows quarterbacks to survive the early chaos and eventually lead at the highest level. And as Shedeur watches from the outside, preparing for his own leap, there's a quiet message being sent. The league will test you, the spotlight will expose you, but if you can stay grounded, competitive, and honest, respect will follow. And that's why this moment wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders, it was a reflection of the quarterback Caleb Williams is becoming. Everything about this story points forward. The game in Boulder may be in the past, but its impact is still unfolding in real time. Caleb Williams and Shedeur Sanders are now on a collision course that feels inevitable, even if it hasn't happened yet. Different paths, different timelines, but the same destination. And when those paths finally cross again, the context behind it will matter more than the box score. Caleb is in the trenches right now, learning lessons that can't be taught any other way. He's facing elite defenders, absorbing criticism, and discovering what it really means to be the face of a franchise. These early struggles aren't an ending, they're a foundation. History has shown time and time again that the quarterbacks who survive this phase often come out sharper, tougher, and more complete. Writing him off now would miss the entire point of the process. Shedeur, meanwhile, is preparing for his moment with intention. Another year in college gives him time to polish the details, control the narrative, and step into the league with clarity instead of chaos. He's watching everything unfold, studying what works, what doesn't, and what the NFL demands from quarterbacks the second they arrive. When his name is finally called on draft night, he won't be walking in blind. And when the comparisons begin, and they will, this moment of respect will loom large. The Heisman winner versus Coach Prime's son, the #1 pick versus the quarterback who waited, the one who jumped early versus the one who took his time. The storylines will write themselves, and fans will argue endlessly about who made the better choice. But beneath all of that noise is something more real. Two quarterbacks who have already tested each other on one of the biggest stages college football can offer. Two competitors who know exactly what the other is capable of, in two careers that are still very much being written. When they finally meet again, whether in a regular season NFL game or through years of comparison and debate, it won't feel random. It'll feel earned. And that's what makes this so compelling, because this isn't about rivalry fueled by ego, it's about respect forged under pressure. In a future collision the football world won't be able to look away from.